This is Do It For a Living, your source for inside information on the future of automotive performance.
You know, honestly, my haters were my number one motivator. I had some people, you know, obviously talking smack out there on the forums and all kinds of stuff, and that's definitely my number one motivator.
What's holding you back from starting or growing your business into what it can be? Well, if you're listening to this, it's not a lack of information. What you're about to hear is all you need to get motivated and start making waves. Do It For a Living podcast details the journey of today's true players in their own words. Find out how they broke out so you can too. The time is now. The time is always now.
So, I've got Brian Tooley, one of the biggest names in LSX camshafts and founder of Brian Tooley Racing. He's the main man behind Brian Tooley Racing and formerly with Total Engine Airflow. Brian, how's it going?
Great. How are you doing this morning?
Oh, I'm living the dream, baby.
Great.
Tell me, you know, I like to dive right in.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about kind of how you came up. Tell me just the history of Brian Tooley Racing and what you've been up to and how you've gotten to where you are. Just give me a little bit of history. Okay. Get people up to speed with who you are.
Okay. Well, I think like a lot of people, you know, I bought a brand new Z28 when I was 18, and which definitely changed the direction of my career, I guess you might say, because I was really into electronics and computers and all that, and kind of switched gears. Eventually, 1993, I started Total Engine Airflow. I bought a flow bench and started porting heads. Just a year later, I was hired into Holley in product development. They actually leased my flow bench from me the first year I worked there. What seemed like should have been a dream job, working in product development, you know, running engine dynos and developing new parts, was pretty much a nightmare due to management. It was absolutely the worst management I've ever incurred in my life. So I only stayed there a couple of years. You know, restarted Total Engine Airflow around 96, and by 2001 we had bought a 5-axis CNC machine, and I was doing heads for the like of Bischoff Engine Service, Proline Racing. You know, we were shipping about 3 pair of heads a day, about 15 pair of heads per week through Total Engine Airflow. And then that, you know, it got the attention of Trikflow. We did a lot of Trikflow heads. We had some of the best programs in the country for Trikflow heads. And 2003, we had a great year. Well, 2003, Trikflow had a bad year. AFR was killing them because all of AFR heads were CNC'd. Basically, in 2003, Trikflow was the only cylinder head manufacturer in the United States who did not offer their own cylinder heads CNC ported. And so Trikflow had talked to me before about coming to work for them. So late 2003, they talked to me again. And of course, the only way that I could go to work for them is if they bought my entire business, which they did in 2004. So by November 2004, I moved to Talmadge, Ohio, to be part of Summit Trikflow. And then I was there till about 2010. Had 2-year non-compete with those guys, which ended in 2012, which is when I started Brian Tooley Racing.
So take me back to the starting of Total Engine Airflow. Like how old were you? What industry contacts did you have? And what kind of hurdles were there to getting off the ground?
Well, you know, it's funny because, in 93, I was 29. And there weren't very many people who had flow benches. It was kind of a new thing, you know, at least among the people who I knew. And I think I was very much handicapped in one regard, that I wasn't able to be mentored by, you know, some of these, you know, top-notch cylinder head porters, you know, like the Lumps down in Texas and some of these other guys that have been doing it forever. So I had to learn everything the very, very hard way. I guess one thing that I did have going for me was I bought Audi Technology flow data software, which allowed me to obviously, of course, store everything I've flowed in terms of flow files. But also, that software would allow you to, compare, CFM difference from graph to graph, and even percentage difference. And whenever I started comparing stuff and percentage difference, that really helped me, see things that you might not pay much attention to, particularly at the point in time that I discovered that, low lift airflow, intake or exhaust on a street head is fairly undesirable. It's about as desirable as a bunch of overlap because it acts exactly the same way. So what you have to do is develop heads where they flow the least amount possible around 100 lift, and then the most amount possible by 300, 400, 500 lifts, which is obviously a balancing act with valves, valve job, combustion chamber shapes, and all that. Right. I know I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent there, but but anyway, certainly learned a lot, porting heads, and obviously that knowledge comes in handy to this day, doing camshafts. The more you understand about cylinder heads and good and bad, that certainly enables you to calculate desired camshaft open close points like we do every day.
So how did you get your name out there in the early days?
It was very difficult. In the early days, in the 90s, I was advertising in Muscle Mustang. I was advertising in the NMRA rag, whatever it was called. I don't know if it's Race Pages or what it was called. The NMCA had a rag as well. Really struggling, I think, to get the name out there. And even all the money that we spent on advertising, it was definitely a good old boy club, and you were either in the club or you were not. And I was definitely not in those days. And in the magazine editorial, particularly NMRA, I mean, they would have a race, and our heads would be out there setting records, and they would actually give our competitors credit for doing those cylinder heads, knowing full well that we did them. Which is really a kick in the teeth when you're working very hard to provide the best products you can, and the magazines that you're actually paying money to are working against you at the same time. Pretty disheartening.
So what do you do in that situation?
Well, it was about 2003. It kind of came to a head for me, and the LS stuff was really taking off. Because that was dealing specifically with the Ford heads-up racing that we were doing, with the Renegade classes and Street Outlaw and some of those. So it came to head. The forums were coming on. The LS, cylinder head market was really coming on for us. So I basically told those guys to stuff it, and we started putting all of our money in forum advertising. In the LS industry, and a lot of people don't know, we were really, really strong in the heads-up Ford racing. I've never actually owned a Ford. I'm a Chevrolet guy by background, and so getting back, back to my roots, I guess, so to speak, was definitely good. I went out and bought a Corvette in 2003, and we went nines with it, which was good. Yeah. So, it was tough early on for sure. Very, very tough to get the name out there.
Right. So have you always been a car guy? Do you come from a car family?
Well, it's funny. My dad and one of his buddies actually had a circle track car when I was growing up. And I think being here in Kentucky, there's lots of rednecks, of course, and lots of cars and hot rods, and it seemed like everybody had some kind of performance car or a built engine in a four-wheel drive truck or something. I was around a lot of performance stuff, so I was definitely around it, but it wasn't my it wasn't my biggest interest. Electronics was definitely my biggest interest.
So growing up, like when you're, 12, 13, 14, you're young.
Yep.
What are you doing with your time, and where are you thinking you're going to go? And then, take us back to that. And then, high school.
It's really interesting because in grade school, I spent all of my allowance at Radio Shack. Back then, they had these 250-in-1 and 500-in-1 electronics kits that you could buy and make all these different things. And I literally spent all my money at Radio Shack. So I knew in high school that I was going to get into electronics, and then once in grade school rather. And then once I got into high school, continued to learn and build stuff and do stuff. And in my senior year, 1981, first computer class at my high school, and took that, and obviously did well in that. Joined the Navy to become an electronics technician. Spent almost 2 years in school in the Navy, and then ended up working in Missile Control Center on a ballistic missile submarine.
Okay.
So that was a very cool experience because I was also into model rocketry as a kid. I was a geek for sure.
So you've always been building stuff.
Yeah, I've always been building stuff. Yeah, and I would say I was more of a geek. I think you got to call a spade a spade. I definitely wasn't the guy out there, building an engine when I was 15. I was the guy out there building model rockets and doing electronic stuff.
Okay.
Obviously loved cars, loved speed. We always had dirt bikes and 3-wheelers and 4-wheelers, and we were always doing stuff with that. So as when I joined the Navy and bought that Z28 brand new, that was 1983. That was the first year for fuel injection on a Chevrolet, I guess, period. Certainly first year for it in a Camaro.
Yeah.
And, that definitely changed the direction, of my future.
So you buy this car, and you said you were fresh out of the Navy when you bought that car, is that right?
No, fresh in the Navy.
Fresh in the Navy,
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So you buy this car, you're fresh in the Navy, and how does that transform into you taking this on as a career? Like, what about that car drove you crazy?
Well, I tell you what, electronics was always loved it up until the point that the final schooling that I had in the Navy was dealing with microprocessors, pushing ones and zeros in and out of buffers and all that stuff, and it was obviously pretty boring. In comparison to a new Z28. But, more importantly, when you're dealing with electronics and ones and zeros, you're dealing with a whole lot of stuff that you can't see. And I like the aspect of an engine and that I could see everything on it. I could touch everything. And, and it seemed easier, I guess. But it was ironic that I eventually led into a position where I was chasing airflow, which is yet another thing that you can't see.
So you get this car. You're now starting to get excited. It's more fun than what you're doing at work.
Yeah.
How did you know? When did you know that you were going to turn this into a career, though?
Well,
it sounds to me like you're a hobbyist at this point.
Yeah. And one of the great things about being on a Navy base is they had what they called a hobby shop, and you could literally take your car there, rent a spot. You could even get a spot with a lift. Use the tools all for free. So young man with a brand new car and not a lot of money left in his pocket because of the new car payment. It was pretty easy to go to the hobby shop and tinker, and then started buying parts to modify the car, and And then, I did that, built my first engine, in my apartment in the Navy, and, eventually got out after 6 years. And
hang on. Take me back to built your first engine in the apartment. Is this the typical engine stand in the kitchen type situation?
Yes, sir. Yep. I had a 400 small block Chevy, ported the heads on the kitchen table. Yeah, that was 1987, I believe. First set of heads I ported. So yeah, that was, because a bunch of Navy guys, it seemed like everybody, all of us either had some kind of performance car or motorcycle, or I had both actually. So you're, always out there trying to outrun each other. And the 5-liter Mustangs had come on strong through those years. And your 305 cubic inch crossfire fuel injected engine was not going to keep up with a new 5-liter at all.
Yeah.
So, so it was definitely interesting to say the least.
So I need you to paint the picture of that transforming into total airflow, or
okay.
like I said, like the kind of the next step. So
yeah. So I got out of the Navy, and I was actually came back to Kentucky. Was offered 2 positions. One as electronics technician in a aluminum processing plant, and then I was also offered a maintenance mechanic position in another plant. Maintenance mechanic was not my background, but it did give me the opportunity to learn how to use mills and lathes and weld, and do some of the other stuff that I was interested in. And so I was a maintenance mechanic for about 4 years, and of course I'm porting all my buddies' heads. We're doing all kinds of stuff. It's kind of hilarious. A buddy of mine, I got out of the Navy in 1989. A buddy of mine had an '88 Corvette, and of course that's a crossfire fuel injected 350, and we took the thing all apart and ported the heads, ported the intake. He was a machinist, so he dowel pinned the runners to the base and that plenum. And, we put a lot of effort into this thing. And there was a race every year, Beach Bend here in Kentucky. They called it the Corvette Homecoming. And in 1989, we won King of the Hill at the Corvette Homecoming. We had the fastest Corvette down there, which is laughable, really. As
a bunch of DIY guys?
Yeah. It was kind of funny because another guy had a car built by, a big name in that arena back then. And, we were faster than him. And by the end of the weekend, he called us liars. He said, there's no way you guys, there's no way that's a stock short block 350 with home ported heads and intake. There's just no way. So I, which didn't offend me at all. I thought it was laughable first, and then realized it was a big compliment second.
Yeah.
And so, all my buddies are like, yeah, you need to port heads. I'm like, heck no. I have no interest in being self-employed. And 4 years into being a maintenance mechanic, the factory I worked at, Drackett, we made Windex and reduced air fresheners and stuff. That sold to S.C. Johnson and moved to Racine, Wisconsin. And they gave me about a $7,000 or $8,000 severance check, and I went and bought a brand new flow bench and started porting heads.
And the rest is history.
Yep. And I only did that for about a year before I was hired at Holley, and then, like I said, I was at Holley for a couple of years. Quit there. By 96, 97, I was buying machine shop equipment and more equipment. Just bought equipment as I could afford it. Yeah. And by 2001, the acquisition of a true 5-axis simultaneous CNC machine was definitely a big deal, because the people that I'm competing against in grassroots racing in 2001, none of them had a true 5-axis simultaneous CNC machine. So it was it was a big leg up for us. It was a big opportunity. It was actually somewhat scary. At that point, obviously we still had, half-page, full-page ads in Muscle Mustang. And so having that technology combined with having success, we had just we worked with Bob Kurgan in 2000. He won a Renegade Championship, which is a very popular class. You got to run a 306 flat top piston, a 550 lift hydraulic roller cam, and and those guys are out there, going low 9s and high 8s, and so with street heads and hydraulic roller cams. So it's a very popular class for the masses to watch and follow. And so, interestingly enough, by the fall of 2001, going into the fall, late summer, we actually had more heads to port than we could possibly get done. We could run the CNC 24 hours a day. It took 4 hours to do one head, so it took about 24 hours to do 3 pair. And we had a backlog of 8 weeks of heads waiting to get on the CNC machine. And then actually 9/11 happened, and our phone didn't ring for 2 weeks, which actually kind of gave us a breath to catch up. And
wow.
So it was interesting business, but very, very tough business.
Why?
I hired a lot of young guys, that were just local guys. I probably wasn't charging enough for what I was doing, so therefore I couldn't pay them enough. I certainly couldn't pay enough to bring good machinists from out of state. So, I'm hiring in young guys that, maybe had some type of machining class in high school or trade school or something, trying to train them, how to do the job. And
right.
And I think those guys tended, they're young. I think they tended to party and come in, hungover and therefore, make mistakes. And, so we had plenty of problems and plenty of issues. And
so take me to one of those issues, one specific issue. Like, think back to maybe the most annoying or the most problematic issue that you ran into. Can you take us back to that situation and paint that picture, and then what you did about it to keep your customer happy and to keep the business going and in a good light?
Well, a lot of things were just internal. The 5-axis CNC, it had 2 big cables that ran the 4th and 5th axis that sat on the table, and obviously you had to keep those wires, in a particular place. Otherwise, you would pull them out of the CNC chassis, and and somehow one night, one of my guys managed to get those cables in front of the CNC, so when it rapid it out, when the head was finished, ripped the cables out, and it took us days to get the thing repaired and back up. They would, something as simple as surfacing a cylinder head. We had a very great surfacer, had what's called a wind-filled fixture. You could set it up to surface a head within a minute. And, guy not paying attention. I've never seen anybody do this in my life, but he managed to ruin a head on that surfacer. He had it so unlevel. So there was just lots and lots of problems. And I think it's due to the people who I hired. I hired young guys who I probably, although that guy actually came from a well-known school in Texas, was a student there first, and then eventually a instructor. So you hire somebody like that from out of state, and you think, well, this guy should be good. But like I said, I think that those guys came in dazed and sleep deprived, doing things that they shouldn't be doing at night.
Right. I want to transition a little bit, Brian. So when you're, it sounds like you've had, ups and downs. You've had kind of different points in your career where you were working at Holley and then you were doing your own thing, and then, the situation with the magazines. Yep. When all this is going on and there's, high highs and low lows, how do you deal with that and kind of stay motivated to keep grinding, keep going after it?
I think, honestly, my haters were my number one motivator. I had some people, obviously talking smack out there on the forums and all kinds of stuff, and that's definitely my number one motivator. I know that sounds crazy.
Probably. No, that's great. People that are listening to this need to think that when they get to the point that they've got haters, that's what you're looking for. Like, you really should be hunting for this point, and then then go find more, because if you don't have haters, you're not ruffling any feathers, you're not doing anything of significance.
Probably.
I mean,
yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so, and for me, I had only owned one flow bench. It was a flow data, and we didn't fluff numbers. We put a cylinder head on that flow bench, and we floated on intake, and then we floated on exhaust, and whatever numbers it produced is what it produced. And sometimes those numbers didn't coincide with what a Superflow 600 would produce. Which years later.
I want to talk about that, actually, because this goes into dyno tuning and other things where, look, a lot of guys will just put out some huge numbers, and then if you're the realistic, non-fluffed numbers guy and you're putting out numbers, the uneducated guy that's looking at that just thinks Brian Tooley Racing has lower numbers than the XYZ knucklehead over here.
Right.
So there's always pressure to fluff those numbers, right? So that you can play the internet game.
Well, for me, there was pressure to produce better ports, better valves, better valve jobs, better chambers. That was the pressure for me. I would go see, what my competitors were advertising for flow, and then we would take ahead and, we would grind on it for days or weeks or months or whatever it took to produce, competitive flow numbers. It wasn't until I was inside of Trikflow, after I'd sold the business, that that I really learned a lot about flow benches and the differences, because Trikflow did have a Superflow 600, and so we were able to take cylinder heads and flow them back to back on both benches. And what we found was we had heads that would be within 1% bench to bench, and we had heads that would be as much as 10% off from bench to bench.
Huh.
So this comes into a thing, because let's say your dyno reads 5% higher than the next guy or 4% lower than the next guy or something like that. Well, when you've got two flow benches in the same building, and one head is within 1% and another head is as much as 10% off, then you've got an issue there. We had very good flow fixturing and all that stuff, so we knew it wasn't a flow fixture. Well, when you looked at a flow data flow bench, and immediately below the steel plate the head mounts on, it had a great big air filter that actually acted as a diffuser. The Superflow flow bench, underneath a steel plate, just a few inches below it, is a plexiglass plate, and it actually pulls all the air off to one side, right?
Okay.
So I speculated if you put the swirl meter, on both benches with cylinder heads, that you would see big differences in swirl meter readings, which we saw. Well, then the next thing we did was, hey, let's put the swirl meter on each flow bench with no head attached, right? Because it shouldn't move. And, of course, if you put a swirl meter on a flow data flow bench, set it on intake or exhaust, it does not move. If you do that on a Superflow, it will swirl its butt off due to the fact that it's, bringing all that air in from one side. And so what's happening is the air is flowing into that cylinder. The air, the direction it pulls it, may be working with that port, and it may be working against that port.
How did you maintain consistency then?
Well, so we always use the flow data to develop ports. And then, Trikflow got to where they eventually would just, flow the head on a Superflow, and whatever the numbers were, they were, and that's what they advertised. But, the other interesting thing was we realized, fairly early on that, what a head flows at 300, 400, and 500 lift is what really makes power. And the other interesting thing about flowing those heads back to back was in that lift range is where there was actually the biggest difference. At 100, 200 lift, it may be only, 2, 3, 4, 5%, and then it quickly grows into 8, 9% difference, through that critical mid lift. And then by high lift, 700, 800 lift, it may be back down to 3 or 4%. So, we're looking for this, these big mid lift numbers on our flow data flow bench, which we were, able to deliver. And you couldn't, those would not materialize on that Superflow flow bench, which made me then realize that, many things. I mean, number one, I understood then why some of my competitors bashed me, but then number two, I also understood why I think it was possible that, my cylinder heads was out there outrunning my competitors, while they were scratching their head. Because, as soon as we were out there winning races, setting records, winning championships, we were accused of cheating, and I never cheated. I mean, cheating in a heads-up class just seemed dumb to me.
Yeah.
It's just like, if you got to cheat to win, then you should just do something else.
It's so funny. It's so funny how when you if you start winning, how that kind of stuff comes out of the woodwork.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And we were, at one point, Trikflow was even accused of delivering special castings to us that only we could get.
Yeah.
Which was comical,
Yeah.
And
the excuses just start pouring out.
Exactly.
Start pouring out. So when you're doing that, and maybe your numbers are lower than, knucklehead down the street for a period of time, but over time, your stuff is winning.
Well, our stuff may not be as high as we advertise on their bench, but whenever we flowed their stuff on our bench, our stuff was always better.
So did you post that stuff on the forums and have those conversations publicly?
No, I didn't spend a lot of time on the forums back then. I had, several competitors who did. Obviously, some of my biggest haters seemed to live on the forums. I was way too busy.
You were in the shop working.
Oh yeah, I was in the shop working.
Online.
And I was doing phone sales, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and then spending 4 hours a day digitizing CNC programming. I didn't have hours to sit around and get on the forums and beat my chest about how great I was. Right. So. And
is that your philosophy now too, or what?
Absolutely.
If you had to give advice to somebody listening to this right now, would you tell them just to put their head down and grind,
yep,
or would you tell them to balance a little bit? Like, tell me what you think that spread would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
you got to tell people about what you're doing. If you're doing the greatest thing in the world,
yeah,
it might take years for people to catch on.
It may, absolutely, but people will catch on. So I think that you're far better off, to let your customers speak for your products and let the results, most importantly, speak. It was funny in 2004 when I sold my business to Summit Racing. I had to meet Scott Peterson. He's the VP of Summit, and I met him in his office. And one of the first things he told me, he said, the only thing that matters is results. Everything else is bullshit. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. And I have carried that, saying with me to this day. And I tell everybody, and I tell guys who I sell, parts to or do business with, they talk about, some of the internet drama and all that. And I'm just like, man, just keep hitting them with results.
Yeah.
Don't get down in the trenches and argue with them. Just show them the results, because the results at the end of the day, that's what really matters.
That's right. Don't argue with an idiot. He'll drag you down to his level and beat you with experience.
That's exactly right.
Tell me something right now that you're doing that's got you fired up. What are you guys doing? One thing that you're excited about.
Well, I tell you, right now I've got more exciting things going on than I can even talk about. Of course, we broke ground on a new 15,000 square foot order fulfillment center last December, and it will be It will be finished around October, November this year. So
that's exciting.
Very excited to get in that. But certainly I can't let the cat out of the bag just yet. But there's a very big deal, I guess, coming. We're actually starting a new website with, I guess, what you call a celebrity from a TV show. So that's obviously a huge opportunity to combine our order fulfillment experience and infrastructure, with someone of celebrity status. So we're
bring some more awareness to what you guys are doing.
Well, it's
eyeballs.
It brings business to a website. Name recognition brings people to a website, and that's what it's all about. If you can offer the same product that Amazon or Summit Racing offers at the same price and give the same great service, then you can start competing against those guys.
So how does Brian Tooley, like, your guys' pricing is, really, I would say low. I mean, it's really competitive.
Yeah.
So how do you operate it at what I assume are razor thin margins, and how do you grow a business that way?
It's really interesting because
are you taking your own cash and just are you relying on growth over time and just kind of hurting in the short term and using your own cash for growth, or how does that work?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly. It's really an interesting business model, because when I had Total Engine Airflow, I never. It's like I wouldn't be making any money, and I thought, what, if I had more business, then I would make money, because I'm working, X amount of employees for X dollars per hour, per week, and So if I get more business, then I'll have more employees, working for that same hourly rate, and eventually I'll make money. And I just kept getting more business and more employees, and what I ended up having was just more headaches, more issues, more problems, and really never really made any money.
Yeah.
And so when I started this business, I started it in my basement with a specific purpose of making net profit.
Uh-huh.
So, of course, when I started Total Engine Airflow, somebody asked me what a profit and loss sheet and a balance statement was, I would be like, deer in the headlights. What are you talking about?
I don't know. I'm just doing cylinder heads.
Yeah. Profit and loss statement. What is that? Yeah. So obviously, in the following years, I got obviously much better at business. And, in looking at expenses and being able to read a profit and loss sheet and a balance sheet and understanding. So when I started this business, I started in my basement, with the, express purpose of net profitability. And my goal was 10%. And so what I did was I contained my operating expenses so that I had a real net profit.
Yeah. So you take that net, put it back into the business?
Exactly.
And then bootstrap it and grow it that way.
I had to give, obviously the government their part, and then 100% of the rest went back into inventory, because what we found was we were selling somewhere between 50% and 100% of our inventory level per month.
Okay.
So
you're doing 30-day inventory turns.
Well, I guess on paper, really what happened was we had some products that were turning 15 and some that were probably turning as slow as 60, but, certainly turning, the value of our inventory, about every month. So, it doesn't take long to recognize, well, as we add inventory, we're going to add sales, and that's exactly what happened in our busiest months. We would, whatever our gross value of inventory was almost exactly what our sales were. And so we, I borrowed money from my mother-in-law, from my neighbors. I got investors from anywhere I could get investment. I bought as much inventory as I could buy.
So did you give them equity for that, or just do it as a loan?
Nope, loan interest only, and paid very favorable interest rates, upwards of 8%, which, these, retired people looking at making 1-2% a year, you offer them 8%, they're pretty happy.
Yeah.
So. Right.
So it's win-win.
Yeah. It works out great for them, works out great for us. So building that inventory has definitely been key for us.
So when you were in the basement, it was your idea. Maybe you put a website together. Did you right away start with 1 or 2 fulfillment guys, or
nope.
or what? How did that look?
I was by myself.
So it was you. Orders would come in through the website. You would fulfill the orders.
I did everything. I packaged the products. I fulfilled the orders. I put the stuff in my truck at the end of the day and ran it to UPS and USPS.
And this was when?
This is 2012.
So this is just 4 years ago. And now you guys are building a 15,000 square foot fulfillment center.
Yes.
You got to fill in the gaps.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. A lot have happened in between there. Absolutely. And so what we did different, I think, or what I did different, everybody that goes to do a performance website, it seems like they all do the same thing. They put 50,000 or 100,000 SKUs on there, and they have nothing. They have empty shelves. They're trying to drop ship everything, and it's an absolute disaster. And what I did was when my website went live, I might have had 20 SKUs, but it was all in stock. And as capital became available, I added inventory and added inventory and added inventory. And, we maintained, probably 99% inventory levels in stock.
So how do you deal with, as soon as you only have 20 SKUs, that sounds all fine and dandy until everybody's calling you and asking you for something you don't have. How do you deal with that?
Well, you just have to wait until capital becomes available and until you can purchase.
Do you tell them no, call me back next year, or do you say I can special order it for you?
Well, I mean, if somebody, because what happened to us was, we're selling spring kits and push rods, and then all of a sudden, we sold a few camshafts, and the guy's like, man, you should do a cam for this and cam for that. So we added all these cams, and then they were like, well, you should add all the stuff to do a cam swap, all the gaskets and bolts and everything needed there. And then as you add and add, then their requests just keep on coming. Well, if you just added this, and I've got dealers to this. Right now, one of the big things that we're going to start stocking when we move into our new facilities is new headers, stainless headers, and from honestly across the pond like our competitors do. But I've got dealers who, say, hey, I only buy this one part from those guys. I buy everything else from you. You guys have better service. If you could please stock this, these headers, I would only buy them. I'd buy everything from you.
Yeah.
Or if you pick up, if you could pick up air raid, cold air kits or whatever, so we have lots of requests from our dealers that we sell to. And we do have hundreds of dealers worldwide. Obviously, most of the ones are here in the States, and those are the guys that need the parts. And those guys need the parts quickly. If a guy drops off a new Corvette Camaro, Cadillac CTSV, that guy generally wants that car back in about a week, no more than 2. Well, that means that shop they have to have parts there in 2 to 3 days.
Yeah.
And one of the other great things that we did early on was we went to live inventory on our website. And at first people didn't believe it. And really, even to this day, they'll call us, you really have this, this in stock? You really have this many of those in stock? Yeah, we really have that,
So your live inventory on your website is legit. Like if it says it's in stock, that means it's in stock?
It's in our building, not somebody else's, and it's ready for immediate shipment.
Did you do that from day one?
No, we didn't. Actually, the entire time we were in the basement, we didn't do that. We didn't have live inventory until the beginning of 2014.
I mean, that seems too good to be true, to be honest. When I see stuff like that, I mean, my first reaction is, I better call and check.
Exactly. Yeah, and we finally got, certainly at least all of our dealers trained, to where, if it showed in stock, they knew it was in stock. I mean, there was a 99.9% chance that the live inventory was correct. I mean, obviously you're going to have some discrepancies in inventory from time to time.
Sure. But it's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that we did was if it was out of stock, we wouldn't even allow the product to be sold, which I had, other buddies in bigger, more successful businesses than what I had saying, well, that's all wrong. You've got to sell everything you can to everybody. And my thought was, no, if stuff being out of stock, drives up our customer service requirements for somebody calling every day asking if it's in stock yet, and if it frustrates our customers, why would we do that? Let them go to Summit or Jegs or whoever else has it in stock to buy it.
So it sounds to me like you've had quite a business education. What resources have you used, mentors, books, courses, etc., to get your understanding of the economics of this thing to the level that it is now? Like, what resources have you used?
Well, it's pretty amazing because, early on when I was learning how to port heads, I'm trying to learn all I can about, how to port heads and how to make power and, all this other engine-related stuff. When this business started taking off, I got on Amazon and started buying books on business management, people management. Whenever I was at Summit, fortunately, they had sent me to a Dale Carnegie course on, how to manage people better. And, of course, that Dale Carnegie book, How to Win
Friends and Influence People.
Yeah, that's, one of the first books I read way back in the day. Excellent book.
To anybody listening right now, go to Amazon.com and get How to Win Friends and Influence People, or Audible if you got to do audio. That's how I do all my studying, I'd say, in car university.
Yeah.
So when I'm driving around, I listen to Audible. But How to Win Friends and Influence People, guys, go get it.
Yeah, and then I bought Donald Trump's Midas Touch. I bought Jack and Susie Welch, Real Life MBA. I bought Rick Pitino, Success is a Choice. mean, there's and on and on and on. And
so you went out and made that happen. You didn't just get this level of understanding and just through experience. You're seeking out
absolutely
these resources.
Absolutely, and you're talking to a guy who hates to read. From the time I graduated from high school until this business started, I could count the books that I read on probably one finger. Since this business has started, I've got stacks of books that I've read on everything from, like I said, business management, people management, marketing. You can't possibly know enough, and I think that's what everybody needs to recognize. I'm 52, and when I was in my 20s, I think everybody thinks you know it all.
Yeah.
And then you get a little older and you realize that you can't possibly know enough. And I think, of course, as I started self-educating myself, I'm reading different articles, and then I read this article about Dylan. The name of the article was "All Successful People Had This One Thing in Common," and I thought, well, I got to read what that is, and that was self-education.
Yep.
If you're not self-educating, you're not moving forward.
Preach.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that's what this podcast, that's what Do It for a Living is all about. It's about trying to give people context to go and self-educate, trying to hear it from guys like you that they idolize, telling them, hey, guys, go read this, go self-educate. It's so much more valuable to hear it from you than it is to hear it from, your mom or your dad. You're like, yeah, leave me alone.
Yeah.
Or,
Particularly, it's like if you talk to someone who self-educates, who has read books since they were, in high school, that's one thing. But when you talk to a guy who doesn't read books, doesn't like to read, who now, spends lots of his free time reading, I think that speaks volume about how important that is. It's very, very important. Most important thing I do. For sure.
Everything in here, everybody listening to this is a car guy, and we all have common threads. And one of those things is we would rather be in the shop doing things or at the track.
Absolutely.
But you have to, you just have to get to depending on the level that you want to get to, you got to self-educate. I preach, my friend.
Yeah, amen. And along with that, there's things that I've always believed that when you read it in a book, at least for me, it kind of reinforces what I think I know. Or, sometimes it doesn't. But it's like being friends with my employees. People are like, oh, well, you can't associate with your employees. You can't be friends with your employees. Mm-hmm. Well, real life MBA, they say right in there, why would you not want to be friends, particularly with your best employees?
Right.
Why would you not want to hang out with them after hours? Why would you not want to take them to dinner? Why would you not do that? It's so dumb not to.
So in the self-education process, you'll learn and read all kinds of things that go against, the status quo or wives' tales.
Yes.
Well said.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Well said.
Yeah, and even down to business structure in terms of management. I've always felt I've worked places that just horrible management. And you got these layers of, supervisors and managers and presidents and vice presidents and all this crap and then so too many chiefs and not enough Indians.
Yeah.
And as this business took off, I got another book whose the name actually escapes me right now, but it was actually dealing with businesses that are basically self-managed, and it's it's an interesting proposition, because the thing about a self-managed business is what you're doing is you're empowering your employees to kind of set their own path. You're giving them leeway to make decisions and do things that they wouldn't get in other businesses where they're micromanaged.
Yeah.
And, when you empower people, like that, you definitely end up with a more motivated, happier employee. It seems like there are a lot of business owners who want to micromanage. They have to have their hands in everything. Fortunately, I've never really been like that. It's always been my belief that you should hire good people, teach them, train them, and then turn them loose to do the job they do.
So if it's a self-managed business, who do you think it's important to have, one chief ultimately that they're responsible to?
Well, right now, that comes down to me. I did just hire a new CFO who has, he's a little older than me, has a more business experience than I do. So he is another guy that can, fill that position if I'm gone. But, most of the crew there, they know that they can, make their own decisions. And sometimes you're going to make the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And I don't punish people for making the wrong decision. It's a learning process.
Real quick, do you guys have a operations manual, or is it all just intangible culture that kind of keeps your guys, operating the way that they need to operate, fulfilling on all the promises that they make to customers? And, there's all kinds of judgment calls. If you're on the phone trying to do what you guys do, which is get people their parts as soon as possible in a very, specific industry, like you're not selling commodities, right? It's very specific. It's got to fit this application. It's got to be, so
right.
It's very, very specific.
Yep.
And it's got to happen really quickly. So how do you keep your guys making the right decisions when there's a lot of opportunity for mistake, and things have to happen quickly?
Yeah, well, with my sales staff, I am right there with those guys. So anytime they've got a question, they can just put a guy on hold and ask the question. Sometimes they ask it to another sales guy. Sometimes they ask it to me. I've got I've spent good money on the sales staff that I've got. I've hired, very, very knowledgeable people. And then so some of the other sales guys that may not be as knowledgeable, can go to them and ask questions. And sometimes, they may know more about, I'm not a manual transmission guy, but I've got a guy that works for me who set the Corvette 6-speed record, Jared Kokenauer. So, I might have a question about transmission or, the clutch or whatever that, speed bleeders and, all that, kind of stuff that people might be calling us about, and I'll go ask him and he'll tell me.
Right.
So definitely having a mix of, I think, people who have different knowledge in different areas is important.
When you found those guys, where'd you find them?
Well, honestly, half of them were just my buddies, my race buddies, acquaintances, local guys who, were out there and their cars are going fast or whatever. And a lot of them wanted to come to work for me, Do
you find that a lot of the good guys want to start their own things?
Well, it's interesting because in 4.5 years in this business, I've only had one person quit, and he actually quit to go someplace else to pay more money. He was doing photography for me for the website, and he had an opportunity related to the building industry, which is what his family's into. So it made sense for him to leave. But everyone who works for me has actually signed a non-compete, non-disclosure. So it'd be very difficult for them to, go start a business, I guess, against me.
Sure.
Because I treat people very, very well. I pay them as well as I can. I think every person who works for me, except for one, makes more money than they've ever made. So that keeps people, fairly happy. But just, going back to the book, Real Life MBA, it says you have to love your people. And I do. I love my people. And, I take the whole crew out to dinner every Friday. Of course, being in the industry that we're in, we only have to work the days that UPS runs. So that means we're closed, we're closed every weekend. We're closed every major holiday. So they have we're 9 to 5:30 because we're Eastern time. We don't want to get in at 7 a.m. when it's,
4 a.m.
4 a.m. on the West Coast. Exactly. So, you've got a job, working banker's hours to some degree. And,
And in a pretty cool industry.
Yeah, my entire building is HVAC, heated and cooled. Even the warehouse, even the new building, same way. So we've certainly spent money on employee comfort, which I think is important. A lot of people overlook that. I was somewhat reluctant when I put AC in our warehouse last year, what the monthly bill would be, but we only run it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and our electric bill only went up $100 a month.
Okay. So that's nothing.
That's nothing. Yeah, for employee comfort, that's nothing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you're talking $5 a day for employee comfort. That's cheap.
Sure. Brian, honestly, we breezed right over commercials, and that's just because this has been such a great conversation. And I just love it. I could go on for days, but we're going to have to cut it short for just for practicality.
Okay.
But I got a couple of questions just to end this conversation, and specifically, I'm interested in so we've talked about what you guys are doing, how you personally, your career, how Brian Tooley Racing has evolved over the last few years. What do you think about the industry as a whole? And what do you think about the future of automotive performance? Is it clearly direct injection is happening, engines are getting smaller and turbocharged, electric is going to happen in our lifetimes, in my opinion. What do you think about that for our industry?
I think I guess I'm probably somewhat pessimistic about the future. I mean, I'm optimistic about our immediate future, the next 5 to 10 years. What comes down the road, 20, 30 years from now. Of course, I'll be retired, so it's not going to be, I don't feel like a problem for myself. But I do, it's very interesting. The NMRA race pages, they did a Q&A with me in the 90s, and they said, what do you think the future of cylinder heads is? And I said, I think at some point you will see cylinder heads so good that they can't hardly be improved upon. And of course, that was 1998. I had just flowed my first LS head, and I was kind of blown away how much better it was than the old small block Chevy heads. And, it wasn't that many years later that Chevrolet's offering fully CNC ported heads, on a production vehicle.
From the factory, right?
From the factory, right.
I mean,
yeah.
If that's the case, then yeah, you're yeah.
Yeah, and a 4-valve per cylinder head is the same way. It's difficult to improve upon. So I think that what you're going to see is, typical bolt-ons is going to yield less and less and less. Cylinder heads are going to yield less and less power. I think power adders are probably always going to be popular, turbos, superchargers, nitrous, because no matter how efficient you make an engine, putting a power adder on it is obviously always going to add a lot of power. So
sure. I
feel like those are going to be industries that certainly do well. How
do you stay in front of it? Like say the new C8 comes out, and then say it's a twin turbo V6. How are you gonna stay in front of that?
Well, it's interesting because it's just like the new direct injected engine. When it came out, all these people are clamoring, to go work on the thing. A lot of these shops we sell to, and we knew that we needed to do a spring kit for it. So we bought a brand new head and got it in house and started checking installed heights. And if we needed retainers made or locators made or whatever we needed to have made, we had all that. I've designed it and we had it made. But I wasn't real quick to go out there and make a bunch of camshafts, without doing some testing. And fortunately, I work with a lot of, great shops, and, they come to us and get us to actually spec the cams for them, and then they test them. They take credit for them, which is fine because chances are they actually buy the cam through us.
Sure.
So we still make some money, and then obviously we're selling spring kit and other related stuff. So that's kind of a win-win for us. But, you get feedback. We've got a little cam on the shelf for the direct injected engine. And, we had a shop down in Texas, made 1,100 roll horsepower with this relatively small cam. And, that car, it's LT4 stock short block. It set the quarter-mile, half-mile record for a stock LT4 short block. And, and when you got those types of results, when you're working with that many shops, that many people, that's, it certainly accelerates your learning curve compared to, let's say, we were just a shop and we were just installing our own camshafts that we came up with.
Sure.
We can get so much more feedback from all the people that we do business with.
Yeah.
I mean, we get feedback practically daily, and that feedback, is obviously helps, propel us forward. But I'd say the thing that we don't do is we're not going to be one of the first people out there doing something. We're going to kind of lay back and watch what other people do and watch what mistakes they have. Something I heard years ago: if you're going to be a pioneer, you got to be willing to take arrows in the back. I don't like arrows in my back, so therefore, on some of this stuff, I don't tend to be the guy out there pioneering it. And I say that, and at the same time, we were first to market with an LT1 spring kit, an LT4 spring kit, and
sure, but you're using your partnership dealers to help make that stuff a reality.
Yeah, and making a spring kit for that stuff is really cut and dry. I mean, it's okay, this is the install height we need. This is where it's at. We need to design a retainer like this, so that's real easy for me. But to go out and start modifying, a vehicle. I mean, we're not set up to do that. We were at one time when I had Tooley Airflow. Obviously, we did installs. We had a chassis dyno, but we don't have any of that any longer, and we really don't care to compete against the people that we're selling parts to.
Right.
If we're doing installs and all of that and dyno tuning, well, now we're competing against a whole bunch of people we sell to.
Yeah, right. Now you're racing against people too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't want to, I think the other thing is you can go out there and try to be all things to all people, or you can decide that, what, I'm going to carve out, this little part of the market for myself, and I'm going to try to do this well, and I'm not going to alienate people.
One of our core values here is right along the same lines, which is if you try to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to anyone.
Wow, that's a good saying. Yeah. Yep.
I mean, that I really believe in that, and we believe in that here. So I agree with you on that one for sure. Brian, hey, I've really appreciated this whole time. I hope everybody listening's gotten a ton of value from this and enjoyed the history of who you are, what Brian Tooley is, and what you guys stand for and where you're going. It's been killer. I could go another hour easy, but but we got to cut it down because we both got work to do.
Yes, sir.
Brian, thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Reed.
I appreciate it.
All right.
Brian, last thing, how do we connect with you?
Well, we got the website, BrianTooleyRacing.com, and phone number's on there. And, yep, that's a good way to connect.
That's it. All right.
Yes, sir.
Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you, Reed.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Do It for a Living. You can find out more about this guest, this show, and even details about what we just talked about at our website, doitforaliving.net. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/doitforaliving and tell us who you want to hear from. And most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Click subscribe. Do it now.